Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our complimentary webinar series for U.S. federal government contractors. We're coming to you live from Washington, D.C. today. This webinar series will run for 15 weeks or on 15 Wednesdays as we cover subcontracting opportunities within each of the 15 federal departments. As usual, all webinars are complimentary. You can find the schedule, registration links, and recordings on our website under the subcontracting section. Our data partner each week is GovSpend, formerly FedMine, and our legal perspective will be covered by a rotating government contracts attorney each Wednesday. And after this week, we only have 2 left. So a little bit about us, as you can see on the slide, we provide the following services for federal contractors, including product, service, and software firms across the globe. So you can find more information about us on our website. Our webinars and newsletters reach a vast array of federal contractors, and our YouTube channel now has almost 600 complimentary webinars we're adding every week. So please follow our channel and give our videos a like or a comment. We also offer advertising opportunities, including in this series. So if your organization is interested in reaching federal contractors, you can sponsor an event, our webinars, advertise in our newsletter, or have us post your promotional information on LinkedIn. So contact us at hello@jenniferschaus.com for pricing and the media kit. Please join us on Monday, December 12th at the Kennedy Center for our annual holiday soiree. It's a great networking event. We expect over 200 federal contractors, and we have confirmed attendance from 9 federal departments. You can see there: Department of State, Navy Special Warfare Command, Naval Air Systems Command, the National Guard, Department of Interior, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Health and Human Services, the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, and the Department of Education. So this is definitely a great opportunity. Again, that's Monday, December 12th at the Kennedy Center. You can register on our website. All right, and also we'd like to draw your attention to a webinar happening next Thursday. GSA schedules top to bottom. You can see the agenda there. We have 4 wonderful speakers, including Archisa Meehan, who's with us today. She'll be speaking just a little bit later, and Jennifer Schaus. So make sure that you join us. Again, that's next Thursday at 12 p.m. GSA schedules, and you can find the link to register on our website under the Events tab. All right, and now we'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsors who make this webinar series possible. A special thanks to Tom Johnson and the team at Set Aside Alert for posting this webinar series in their newsletter. Please visit setasidealert.com to learn more about their services for small businesses. Additionally, we'd like to thank GovEvents and also Fairfax County for sharing this webinar series on their public calendars. So please visit their websites and calendars for other related events. Next, we'd like to thank the Virginia PTAC. Virginia PTAC is based out of GMU in Fairfax, Virginia, and offers free one-on-one counseling on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on your business location. If you're interested in learning more, please use the links provided to contact the PTAC. And also, thanks to our friends at BidSpeed. The BidSpeed platform helps you win and increase your probability of winning government contracts. They have opportunities from every federal, state, and local public source in the US. So if you're looking for a compliance matrix, a proposal template, a strategic teaming partner, or details on an expiring contract, BidSpeed can help. BidSpeed is an official partner of the SBA's 7J Management and Technical Assistance Program. Contact BidSpeed at the email or phone number here to learn more. And lastly, we'd like to thank Government Marketing University. Washington Technology provides a direct line to the contractor executives who need cutting-edge IT systems and solutions to serve the largest customer in the world, the government market. Washington Technology's goal is to help attendees hear from Justice Department leaders, leverage IT to modernize operations, engage in discussions about upcoming initiatives, and analyze how contractors can support their department's mission. Our expert coverage and analysis fuels strategic decision around partnering RFPs and resource development, enabling readers to build relationships, bid smartly, and win contracts. GovExec is ready to welcome you in Tyson's Corner tomorrow on December 1st. So register at events.bizzabo.com/DOJ. All right, and with that, today we're here to dig into subcontracting opportunities at the Department of Transportation. So a quick look at our agenda. We'll start today with panelist introductions and then close out, as always, with legal insights. So our first panelist today is Archisha Meehan, representing GovSpend. GovSpend is the go-to resource for finding federal contracting opportunities. So please contact Archisha for more information about the GovSpend platform. It's great to have you with us as always.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
All right, and our legal speaker today is Ed Delisle. He's from the firm Thompson Hine. Thank you for being with us.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
All right, and with that, I'm just going to start us off with the mission statement from the Department of Transportation. I won't read it off to you, but there it is. We've highlighted some key words. It's always important to keep the mission statement in mind when wanting to do business with the department, because then you'll be able to predict a little bit better on their contracting trends. We also encourage you to look at the various agencies and services within the department, spend some time on each of these websites, learn more about each specific role and their missions as well. And here are some links as well. The link to the main department website, as well as the small business office. And that third link there is to the procurement forecast, which can help you understand what the department is buying, when, how much, and if any specific set aside or contract vehicle may be used. And then lastly, that fourth link there is the SBA scorecard, which can help you understand the small business contracting trends and what dollars are being won by women, veterans, hub zone firms, and other disadvantaged businesses. So let's take a look at the top 10 vendors for the Department of Transportation. I won't read these off to you because in just a second, Archisha is going to take us through the top 5. So with that, I'll hand it off to you, Archisha.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Archisha Meehan, and I'm the Federal Director of Federal Go-to-Market at GovSpend. FedMine is a federal company which was acquired by GovSpend last year. So now the GovSpend brand company provides the best of federal and state and local information. So a little bit about the data. We're talking today specifically about subcontracting and how companies can use subcontracting successfully as part of their growth strategy. And while I'm going to talk a little bit about the data, I always like to say that the data that we're presenting, the prime contract piece comes from FPDS, which is the authoritative source for any federal contracts that are being awarded. And the subcontract data comes from USA Spending, which gets its data from FSRS. Keep in mind that this subcontract data is self-reported by the prime or the sub. Typically, I know that the federal government and the SBA look at the data in ESRS. However, that data set is not made public. So how do you use the data that is there, right? Some of the best practices that we've really seen companies use very successfully is once you know which agency you're focusing on, understanding who are the top primes, right? What is the type of work that they're doing? What type of contracts are they winning? And who are they working with in terms of subcontracting? Is there a subcontract plan requirement in that prime contract award? That data is made available actually. And, while we are being very generic in these webinars, I'm always going to advise you to be more specific. Make sure you're using keywords, you're filtering things, and you really want to be doing the work that you excel in. So, that's one thing you want to keep in mind. The other thing that I think is also important is that even if there isn't a subcontract plan requirement, a lot of the companies will work with other companies. And, I think you yet want to be talking to companies that do work and are winning prime contracts in the type of work that you do. So, having said that, let's get into our companies. And the first one that we're going to talk about is TOTE LLC, TOTE Services. They basically are in the shipbuilding and ship management services. This is their link to reach out to someone that to work with. Next slide. When we look at the contracts this company has won, they basically are doing extremely well with $726 million in FY21. As of last week, they were at $426 million in contracts that have been won. And you could see that the prime contracts they have are really from Department of Transportation, specifically at the Maritime Administration, where they won $385 million. And they have been doing a little work at the Department of Navy of about $40 million. I also wanted to show you that last year they actually won a small subcontract that was reported from Reliance Test and Technology. So next slide. The type of work that they're doing really is, they definitely have fixed price contracts, but it's the management of shipyard, the subcontract requirements, installation of IT network solutions, but it's all based in that shipbuilding industry. Next slide. And these are a couple of transaction details that I thought, just so that you can see, while the one is, is delivery of a task in terms and contracts, you could see the type of NAICS codes that get used, but more importantly, there is a specific column that says subcontract plan. And in this case, you could see that there is a commercial subcontract plan requirement. The other contract that they have, which is for the operational mission, that also has an individual subcontract plan requirement. So next slide. And then further, when you start looking at the type of work that they're doing, for them, their work is mainly in the shipbuilding and repairing NAICS codes, with a little bit in the deep sea freight transportation NAICS codes, as also engineering services NAICS codes that was used in FY20, but not in FY21 and 22. So next slide. So that was a little bit about TOTE Services. The next company we're going to talk about is Parsons. Next slide. This is the link to register at Parsons as a small business. So this Parsons company is specifically, it's just this specific entity that's registered under a specific SAM-UEI. Parsons, of course, as we all know, is large and has many divisions and subsidiaries. But this is the specific one the one that we're talking about is the one that actually won the transportation contract, and for $344 million in FY22. The total contracts this company won was $1.07 million. I'm sure the numbers will change a little bit as DoD completes, as we get out of that 90-day delay for DoD transaction reporting. But within the transportation, you can see that the contracts that they won are from the Federal Aviation Administration. Next slide. The work that they do at FAA is a lot of professional, technical, and support work, and management services, data, facilities, things like that, really to maintain the FAA National Airspace System. That's really their largest contract and the work that they're doing. Next slide. This work is falling under the NAICS Code of Research and Development, the 541712. Next slide. And typically when you get into the contract details, you can actually see the subcontracts that they're working with. This is just a quick overview just to show you that, not only does Parsons have reports their subcontractors, and here's a looking, the left side, you can see the top sub-awardees for Parsons, which includes Henry Schein, Costa, Crawford Consulting. Parsons also gets subcontracts from companies such as CACI, EA Engineering, Smartronics, Peraton. So it's always interesting to see this. Next slide. That takes us to our third company for today. That's really Leidos. Next slide. Here is a link to register as a small business vendor. And again, in the case of Leidos, this is really looking at the specific entity that won the transportation contract. You could see that in FY22, they won $334 million from the Department of Transportation. Next slide. And their contracts are really from FAA, and the work that seems to be is for the flight data manager terminals. So next slide. And again, when you get into understanding more about the contract, this is one of the contracts. It's it's a pretty large task order that they have, and more than $555 million being awarded and obligated on this contract that's been in place for a little less than 2 years. And it's really to provide engineering and technical support as required to the various FAA organizations. And again, as you can see, there is an individual subcontract plan. Next slide. This is another example that is that also has a subcontract plan requirement. This contract's been in place with them since 2016. So again, it's important to know the type of contracts that are in place, how long have they been there, and sort of get into more understanding of not only is there a subcontract plan, but who's possibly on that subcontract plan. Now, of course, the results will change if we start putting in keywords, right? If we start doing subcontract searches, things will change based as you start filtering in the results. And you really want to do that so that you're talking and you're able to create a subcontract strategy based on the type of work you do and you excel in. So next slide. The next company we're going to talk about is Harris. Next slide will take us to the link to register as a small business vendor. Next slide is looking at the contracts. This specific one just has transportation as their main client, the specific division of Leidos, where you could see that in 2022, they mainly work with FAA and won more than $312 million. And their work really is in the telecommunications NAICS code. So next slide. And again, it's funding for FDI telecommunication services. And it seems they do have some cost reimbursable claims in these in the contract that they hold. So let's go to the next slide. Again, this has a little bit more detail. One of the contracts does not have a subcontract plan requirement. However, that does not mean that you cannot work with them, And then the other contract that is for FTI telecommunication services does does have a plan requirement. So again, important to know as you create your strategy and you reach out to these companies. Again, using the data to create your your statement, your plan when you call the companies, going from the position of having done your market research and trying to focus on specific opportunities that could be there, I think gets to be really, really helpful for you to create those relationships and open doors. So, that's one of the things that I'm always wanting to tell people. Next slide. And the last company that we're going to talk about is MITA. Next one. Here is the link to register as a small business vendor. Next slide. Quick look at the contracts that they have been winning, more than $1.5 billion last year, with Army, HHS being the top two companies, but transportation does account for a large chunk of their contract awards, which is really $228 million. Next slide. Within transportation, they typically are doing a lot more work for the FAA, but have won a little bit of contracts from the immediate office of the Secretary of Transportation. And their contracts really are in the engineering services NAICS code, so the 541330. Next slide. And you could see that they have won a small subcontract from the Aerospace Corporation. However, they do a pretty good job of reporting the subcontracts with Tummel Labs, information technology, all of them getting various subcontracts. Now, we could always go in further and look at the subcontracts based on keywords and see who are they really working with. Next slide. The type of work that they're doing is also a lot of essential engineering research type of work. That's really what MITA does amazingly well. So, those are the types of contracts that they seem to be getting. Next slide. And then again, you could see some of the work that in this specific case, they are actually reporting the subcontract, and you could see that Carasoft has a little small subcontract, and their prime contract actually has that plan requirement. So wherever possible, that linkage is at least made within our platform, but that is the type of details that you want to get to as you're creating your strategy and creating, how you want to talk to these prime contractors. And I think that's it, Madeline. Oh, this is another one that also you could see Peraton has the subcontract, and this contract too has a subcontract plan requirement. And next slide. I think that's it for me. I know my email is on the slides. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Archisa, as always, for your great insights, your data, and of course your time. Like she said, we'll have her contact information at the end of the presentation. So now quickly, I'm going to go through some marketing best practices. We've listed here the basics for marketing your services to the top primes. Most importantly, you should use the tools available to you on sam.gov or the GovSpend platform to conduct research on the primes and the expiring contracts. Make sure you're using the primes website, their newsletter, and events calendars, as well as social media to learn more about them and then connect. So it's really important that you do this background research before connecting with the prime. And then lastly, set yourself apart and lead with your capabilities, not your socioeconomic status. Bring a specific opportunity to the prime and work with the SBLOs, the small business liaison officers. They're your advocates. We've included the links to get connected with them at each of these companies. So make sure you're taking advantage of that. So now we'll be going over legal considerations and best practices. Please note that we've covered the federal acquisition regulations on the Department of Transportation earlier this year, so you can find the YouTube recording here on the screen. We'll also be sending this out after the webinar. So with that, Ed, I'll let you take it away.
All right, Madeline, thank you very much. Archie, thank you very much for your presentation. Everyone, I'm Ed Delisle. I'm a partner with the Government Contracts Practice Group at Thompson Hine. I'm speaking to you today from suburban Philadelphia. I'm actually attached to the firm's Washington, D.C. office, and not surprisingly, based upon the nature of the work that I do, I find myself in D.C. quite a bit. So today what we're going to cover is some legal issues associated with working with the Department of Transportation, and we're going to focus on the subcontracting aspects of that. A lot of the work that I do pertains to small business procurement work. Small businesses, by their nature, generally find themselves as subcontracting partners on larger procurements, including but not limited to those that flow through the Department of Transportation and its various contracting offices, and we'll get into some of that momentarily. But while I'm going to focus on and speak about some of the specific subcontracting issues that you need to think about as a subcontractor for a DOT project, I'm also going to focus on some other peculiar issues that are pertinent to small business contracting, particularly as it pertains to the Department of Transportation, that everyone who's listening today should be aware of. So before we sort of hop in, let me talk about certain specific issues that from a subcontracting perspective are important and that you should think about, because they will be flowed down to you if you're a subcontracting partner on a Department of Transportation project. Just a few quick ones before we hop into Sam. Record keeping, access, and record retention. If you're a subcontracting partner on a Department of Transportation contract, you're going to be required to keep documents, provide access to documentation, and keep records for up to 3 years. Record keeping can include things like contract documents, accounting information, insurance information, vendor and subcontracting information for yourself. And again, these records will need to be kept for up to 3 years. So it's important just to generally understand that those requirements will be flowed down to you from a prime contracting partner. Compliance with things like the Clean Air Act and Water Pollution Control Act, those will be flowed down to you. The requirements of those particular pieces of legislation in and of themselves, not vastly complicated, but you should understand that they're likely to be in your subcontract somewhere. Compliance with federal civil rights laws and hiring practices will likely be flowed down to you as a subcontracting partner. So requiring that you hire consistent with race, sex, age, disability requirements that are necessary if you're contracting in the federal sector, will all be in your subcontract agreement somewhere, so you should be aware of those. And also, if you're working on a construction contract through the Department of Transportation, prevailing wage rates pursuant to the Davis-Bacon Act will be in your subcontract agreement somewhere. As we talk about some of these flow downs, and I'm going to get into one of them that we find in the Infrastructure Act momentarily. All of them are important, some more important than others. And as we get into the Buy America Act and what they call the BABA provisions, Build America, Buy America, that is contained within the Infrastructure Act, those particular types of very specific subcontract requirements, and they are subcontract requirements because they will flow down to you. It must be flowed down to others that work for you when it pertains, as it pertains to DOT work. As we move forward, those are particularly important. And we'll get into that, as I say, momentarily, but as you get into a particular procurement, a subcontracting opportunity with a prime contractor, and issues arise, they're specific to whatever the situation may be that you find yourself, it is important to make sure that you ask someone who knows. So I encourage everyone to have counsel available to explain some of these issues that may be important in a given situation. As we talk a little bit about SAM and the importance of SAM, and it was mentioned a few times already, as a subcontractor, if all you do is perform work, there certainly are arguments to be made that, well, is SAM all that important? I always tell my clients it's absolutely important, if for no other reason, other than the ability to be found. That's reason enough. But for the most part, you want to be in there. The way to get in there and what requirements are pertinent have changed. It used to be get your DUNS identification number, which you can still get. To get how to do so here. You get your DUNS, you see that that here, DUNS number, and then you'd use that information for purposes of assisting you in signing up for registering in SAM. That has changed. As of April of this year, there has been a shift from DUNS identification numbers to what we call unique entity identification numbers, UEIs, which are now being used by the federal government as part of the SAM registration process. You don't go through and get a DUNS number anymore, though there have been numerous instances of delays associated with the finalization of SAM registration since this change has occurred. We actually just talked about it last month at the SAMI Small Business Conference as part of the panel discussion that we had there. But either way, the DUNS number issue has created, at least as far as some of the panelists that that spoke last month on the SAMI panel that I was with were concerned, is creating some delays associated with being able to fully register in SAM. So as a subcontracting partner to a prospective prime, to the extent that you do need to get yourself situated in SAM, make sure you leave yourself plenty of time, at least 2 or 3 weeks, for purposes of being able to finalize the registration process. But as I say, the DUNS aspect of this has gone away. The unique entity identification numbering system is now in place, and that number will be automatically generated for you once you go into SAM and begin the registration process. But a good first step as you proceed into the federal contracting realm, and in particular as it pertains to DOT, and we're going to get into some of those specifics. Next slide, please. Just sort of generally speaking, we have all sorts who are listening, and they come from different aspects of the contracting realm. Some are newer. The Department of Transportation has 10 different contracting organizations, and you see 6 of them here. And those contracting organizations each have their own distinct responsibilities, along with their own procurement and grant authority. And it's important to understand that each one of these particular entities has their own procurement and grant authority, and the way that the Department of Transportation buys things differs depending upon the situation and how it opts to spend its money. The Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration are 2 of the contracting organizations that I deal with the most. The Federal Aviation Administration is also extremely active in my practice, but it's a little bit different than some of the others, as it has its own separate regulatory authority that it complies with. So whenever you're dealing with the FAA from a legal perspective, the FAA is always going to be a little bit different than some of the others. All right, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, there was a discussion when Archie was speaking about small business procurement. There was a reference to various different small business liaisons for very large prime contractors who are performing for various different contracting authorities within DOT. And obviously, the utilization of small business is extremely important in the federal procurement process, including but not limited to at the Department of Transportation. And if you are a small business and you are small and disadvantaged based upon the guidelines and rules that are promulgated by the federal government, it's important for you to use that position for yourself such that you can take advantage of it. In that regard, there are two different ways that the Department of Transportation buys things. Of course, it can do so directly through its various different contracting organizations. And to the extent that it does so, it's important to understand what that means. What it means from a legal perspective is that the federal acquisition regulations are going to be applicable. And in particular, as I note here, and relating to FAR Part 19, it's important if you are small and are small and disadvantaged because, for example, if the FHWA or the FTA decides that it's going to buy a good or a service directly, then the FAR will apply and its policies and procedures. And under FAR Part 19, what that means is that anything between the micro purchase threshold of 10,000 and the simplified acquisition threshold of 250,000 must be set aside, consistent with the rule of two, which is identified in FAR Part 19. So while we were talking about very large procurements previously, we're talking about smaller procurements here, where as a small business, you'd have the ability to operate as a prime, and the subcontracting partner could potentially be large business, perhaps not in a situation where you have a small business set aside within the simplified acquisition threshold. But of course, as we all know, there are set aside contracts that are far larger than those within the simplified acquisition threshold, which are also something that we see quite often in situations where the Department of Transportation buys something directly and procures directly from the public. And in situations like that, again, you can have 8A companies, hub zone companies, women-owned small businesses, service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses operating as primes, and you can have large business concerns, of course, operating as subcontractors. The other way that the Department of Transportation buys things, and it's not necessarily buying them directly in a situation like this, but it's where it engages with state and local government for Department of Transportation work through individual state transportation authorities. And in situations like that, similar to the small and small disadvantaged business framework through the SBA that is available consistent with FAR Part 19, you have a small business structure that becomes important as it pertains to small businesses that are interested in performing at the state and local level in situations where those authorities are receiving federal transportation dollars, and this grant authority that we're talking about is a big way that the Department of Transportation spends its money and buys things. And if you are a small business looking for subcontracting opportunities in the place where you operate, it's important to understand what this DBE concept is. It stands for disadvantaged business entity. Every local DOT authority that accepts United States Department of Transportation dollars is required to have a DBE program and a DBE plan, which is updated every 3 years. And the idea, of course, is to assure that small and small disadvantaged entities are involved in the highway and roadwork building process in some way, shape, or form. From a subcontracting perspective, it's important to understand it because that is the DBE system that's in place in the various localities that I'm speaking of, because much of local DOT goals are met through the use of DBEs at the subcontracting level. And just to give you a point of comparison, so in 2019, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation spent about $1.5 billion, and of that, 110.5 million of those dollars were spent on DBE firms, and a lot of that work was satisfied through subcontracting plans that prime contractors submitted as part of the procurement process and then were held to by PennDOT. DBEs are certified by the home state that DBE operates in, and there's a unified system that's in place. So a DBE firm that's certified in its home state can easily become certified to perform DOT work in another state. And DBEs similar to 8A companies on the under the SBA's guidelines are those companies that are owned and controlled by someone from an historically disenfranchised group: African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, women, and the company, of course, must be small. And we'll talk about what it means to be small momentarily. They also must perform commercially useful functions, and there is a 5 or 6 point test that local authorities use to address whether or not a commercially useful function is occurring as it relates to a DBE in any particular context. And what that means is that the DBE must be responsible for execution of the work of whatever the contract is, or a distinct element of it, by actually performing, managing, and supervising the work involved. And I paraphrase that from FHWA's, they call it CUF guidelines, commercially useful function guidelines. So all of that becomes very important in the context of understanding what's available to you and what you must do as it relates to Department of Transportation work, whether it be as a direct contract from one of the contracting offices that I mentioned, or through one of the local transportation authorities. Next slide, please. So we talked about the whole concept of small, and from the SBA's perspective, and I wanted to make sure that I mention this, as it relates to highway, bridge, street and bridge construction, currently the size standard, and the size standard is still being measured on either a 3 or 5 year basis. It'll shift just to a 5-year basis beginning in January, but it's currently 39.5 million average annual receipts, specialty trade contractors 16.5 million. That shifts in a few weeks. This is obviously occurring now, from 39.5 to 45 million as it relates to highway and street and bridge construction, and from 16.5 to 19 million as it relates to specialty trade contractors, and that was to adjust for inflation. As it relates to on the local side, the FHWA and FTA have separate standards as it relates to size, and those standards are between the $25 and $27 million range, average annual receipts over 3 years. Everything at the local level is generally measured over 3 years. Next slide, please. Okay, I mentioned when we got started that there are certain aspects of flow down provisions that are particularly important as it relates to subcontracting specifically. And this one is important, and I did make reference to it: Build America, Buy America. And this particular aspect of the Infrastructure Act is super important because it changes the way that the old Buy America Act is being utilized as it relates to Department of Transportation work and all infrastructure projects as they're currently being defined, and it's a very wide net. And as you see here, and this is somewhat paraphrased from the Infrastructure Act itself, the Act bars the award of federal financial assistance for infrastructure unless all of the iron, steel, manufactured products and construction materials used are produced in the United States. That's a big deal. Okay, so you have a $1.2 trillion piece of legislation, $550 billion of which is all new spending, and you have these new, more stringent requirements for Buy America. If we go to the next slide, please. And here, these are actually taken, I believe, from the footnotes that are set forth in the actual legislation, or the some of the implementing information that followed the legislative issuance. So how is iron and steel defined more specifically? It's as it relates to manufacturing, it starts all the way from the initial melting stage all the way through the application of coatings. That's pretty specific and straightforward. So from a prime perspective, you have to obviously understand what this means, because these requirements are going to be in your contract with the Department of Transportation, okay? And you're going to have to flow those down to the subcontractors beneath you, and then that will have to follow all the way through the continuum, okay? So it's the entire supply chain that has to come in compliance with what we see here. In terms of manufactured products, the requirement is that the end product has to be manufactured here, so the end product, and more than 55% of the total cost of the components of the manufactured product that you're talking about. And that 55%, depending upon the contracting opportunity, could go up. In some of the conversations that I had last month at Sammy down in Nashville, there was discussion that it could go up as high as 75% on a procurement by procurement basis. Generally speaking, folks seem to think that 60% was as high as it would go. I guess we'll have to see, but 55% is what the legislation requires. That's the floor. And as far as construction materials are concerned, you see how construction materials are defined here. All non-ferrous metals, plastics, polymer-based products, all of your conduit, glass, lumber, drywall. Interestingly, it does not include cement aggregates such as stone, sand, or gravel, or aggregate binding agents or additives. Those are the only exceptions relating to construction materials. So if you're a subcontracting partner on a project that is considered an infrastructure project, okay, then you have all of these new requirements that you're going to have to take into consideration, not just as a prime contractor, but as a subcontractor as well. And all of these flow downs associated with Department of Transportation work, particularly as it relates to Build America, Buy America, will ultimately end up applying to you as a subcontracting partner as well. So sort of a lot of information. I wish luck to all of you who are pursuing opportunities with the Department of Transportation. There are certainly an awful lot of them going on now, and there will be certainly over the next 5 years or so, as additional programs are rolled out and dollars are allocated, there'll be more. And if anybody has any questions, I do believe that all of my information will be tacked on at the end.
All right, thank you so much, Ed. Yep, as he said, his contact information is there on the screen, as well as Archisa's if you have any questions about the GovSpend platform. So feel free to contact them. This information will also be available as we send out the slides after today's webinar. They'll be on slideshare.net. And you can find the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel about 24 hours after this. So be on the lookout for that. We hope that you can join us next week in our series. We'll be going through the Department of Treasury. So thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you to Archisa and Ed. Have a great rest of your day. This concludes the webinar.